Now, I believe that our next session is a TAPA EMEA first, as we focus on supply chain security from the association's global perspective. As you'll be aware, TAPA is focused on cargo crime prevention and supply chain resilience across all three international regions, the Americas, Asia-Pacific, and EMEA. And this next session provides you with a unique opportunity to put your questions to TAPA's global leadership teams. Now, before the break, we heard progress updates from TAPA EMEA, and now we'll be hearing key updates from Asia-Pacific and the Americas on the association's work, focus, and progress in their respective regions, as well as the types of cargo security risks and trends impacting members' supply chains in these geographies. We'll start with presentations from both regions, and then I'll be inviting more of the teams to the stage for a panel discussion. So please do get your questions in advance through the TAPA EMEA app. So, to start us off, please join me in welcoming to the stage Scott Cornell, Chair of TAPA Americas, and then I'll be calling up Tony Lugg, Chair of TAPA APAC, to present their regional updates. Scott, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you. All right, I have two controllers up here, so I'm already confused, and I just got up here. So, hi everybody. My first time coming to TAPA EMEA event. I'm thrilled to be here, excited to be asked to come up and give an update on what's going on in Americas. Our organization has grown very much over the last several years. I think we've had an average of somewhere around 31 to 33% growth in membership over the last couple of years. But really, I'm going to concentrate on cargo theft trends and updates for the Americas. So, I'm going to go through some of the numbers. I think one of the things I always talk about when I talk about the numbers in Americas is keep in mind that the federal government in the United States does not track cargo theft. There is no federal reporting of cargo theft. Cargo theft crime is usually swept up in multiple other categories of crime in the United States, meaning a police officer in one state could report it as an auto theft, a police officer in another state could report it as a burglary, or a larceny, numerous different things. Most often it'll get reported under a burglary or a auto theft. The result in that is that the statistics do not get captured up to the federal government. They get diluted among those other categories. So in the United States, we have a company, there's really two companies that gather data in the United States. CargoNet is one of our SSPs. Industry-wide, they really do the best job of gathering data for the industry in the United States. Keeping that in mind, all of their data that they get is voluntarily reported, meaning member companies report to them, law enforcement task forces that deal with cargo theft report to them, regional security councils like the Southwest, the Northeast, the Southeast, and the Western states, and the Arizona chapter report to them, and anybody can voluntarily report a cargo theft to CargoNet. The point in mentioning that is that the number that you see is just a sample size. So I work very closely with CargoNet in my corporate role. I present with them quite often, and I always say that I think when you're talking about full truckload theft in the United States, they gather about 1/10 of all cargo theft. If you throw pilferage in there, they gather about 1/15 of total cargo theft. So when you see that number, 3594, multiply that by 15, you're more so in the neighborhood of what the actual number is. Do the same with the dollar figure, you're going to be in the ballpark of what the figure is, just on face value reported. So, but the sample size is good enough to give us really good trending. Their trending is excellent, it's accurate. I have an investigative staff and have had an investigative staff that does cargo theft for years. And we verify, based on what we see street level, that the trends that we see through CargoNet are very accurate. So when we look at cargo theft in the United States, California has been number one. I've been doing cargo theft investigations and supply chain security for 33 years. California has been in the number one spot the entire time. It takes the next 3 or 4 states added together to equal the numbers that California produces. That's not a knock on California. When you look at this and you see California and Texas as the 2 top states, keep in mind, California has the 5th largest economy on the planet. They have multiple large ports, arterial highways, big technology companies, big manufacturing companies, high population density, plenty of money, all the things that you need to create an environment for supply chain security issues and cargo theft. The same goes for Texas. Texas is the second fastest growing economy in the United States. Large port, arterial highways, high population density, one of the fastest growing in population as well. And it makes for the perfect mix of everything you want. After number one, really, that's the only consistent state. All the other states will change position, and we've seen that over time. When all things are normal in the cargo theft world, food and beverage will be your number one targeted commodity. We see that not only in the United States, but in Mexico and South America as well. Household goods is number two. Warehouse, you see that as the number one location for cargo theft in the United States. That is not to say that we have warehouse burglaries or break-ins. What happens, based on the strategic theft that we're going to talk about that we see in the United States, that is where cargo changes hands from the good guys to the bad guys. And so from the law enforcement perspective, that's where the jurisdiction will be with law enforcement, and that's where the loss is reported to have happened. We have been at an extreme alert in the United States since 2023. It doesn't show any signs of coming down or lessening. CargoNet put out their first quarter numbers not that long ago, and some people mistakenly read the numbers. I think it said a 12% decrease in reported incidents. But if you dig into the numbers, you realize that CargoNet takes in any kind of an incident. An incident does not necessarily mean there was a cargo theft. So CargoNet will take in an incident that reports an intelligence or an attempt, some kind of an intelligence memorandum, an attempt at a cargo theft that didn't happen, suspicious activity, and things like that. Well, those types of incidents were down by 12%. But cargo theft, incidents involving cargo theft, were up by 18%. So we're not trending downward. We continue to trend upward. The numbers have been trending up for years. All cargo theft activity in the United States falls into two buckets: straight theft and strategic theft. I think this really does apply for anywhere on the planet for cargo theft. It just depends on how you want to define it. In the United States, we concentrate on these two buckets. So straight theft is called straight theft because it's very straightforward. They physically go out and they steal the freight. They're on location, drop lots, parking lots, truck stops, near the ports, industrial centers, you name it. They're physically out there, putting themselves at risk to steal the freight. Strategic theft is any theft that begins with deception. Basically, they're trying to trick the supply chain into giving them the freight. That's where we've seen the biggest increases over the last several years, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Cargo theft has trended up between 2021 and 2024, roughly 93% in the United States. Tremendous increases since COVID. And if we had more time, I'd get into all the contributions COVID had towards cargo theft in the United States. And maybe we can get into that when we're on the panel. But you see the biggest increases were between 2022 and 2024 when it really jumped. Around 2025, we basically saw, when you see a -4, that's really a flat line for us. The good news is it plateaued, or plateaued briefly. The bad news is it plateaued at record levels in the United States. And again, as the first quarter of 2026 starts off, we're trending back upward again. The real impact that we've seen, what's fundamentally changed everything for cargo theft in the United States, is that strategic theft, that second bucket, has increased 1,475%. And that has really taken the transportation industry by storm in the United States. Strategic theft targets the freight broker part of the supply chain in the United States, and that was the part of the supply chain, or the role in the supply chain, that was the least prepared to have to deal with cargo theft. For my entire career doing cargo theft, freight brokers were pretty much exempt from the issue. It either happened to the carriers, or it happened to the shippers, or there was a contract in place that indemnified them. There was even litigation around the recent Montgomery ruling that came out from the Supreme Court. Previously, there was a couple of cases that actually took that same legal issue and applied it to theft, and they actually determined that the freight brokers were not or could not be held negligent on theft. So freight brokers really didn't have to deal with cargo theft other than the inconvenience of it, but they didn't have to pay for it, they didn't have to respond to it, they didn't have to deal with it unless they were contractually obligated to do so. So this increase targeted them. They were not prepared. They had not had any experience really dealing with it on an in-depth level. When you look at the heat map in the United States for cargo theft, and you just look at the normal patterns, those really heavy, those really dark orange and red areas are what was traditionally the hotspot for cargo theft in the United States, meaning they had all the same things in common. Port cities, high population density, booming economies, arterial highways, all those things, rail yards. So when you look at Memphis and Chicago, for us, we consider them inland ports because of the massive rail yards. So they had all those things in common. But as you can see, strategic theft has started to spread cargo theft all across the country into what we would consider non-traditional cargo theft areas. When you look specifically at the map for strategic theft, you can see that it spreads out immensely away from those port areas and those massive cities that we've usually seen. The advantage for the thieves here is that the people that have been operating in those regions for years were also ill-prepared for cargo theft to come to their area. They had not been dealing with it because straight theft usually hung out around the ports, usually hung out around those major hotspots that we showed in the previous map. Now, because strategic theft is being operated from a perspective of we will target the freight that we want regardless of where it is, they can just go out and target the freight anywhere in the country because they don't have to physically be there. They're not going to go and do straight theft to gain that cargo. Recently, we've seen a huge uptick in the Northeast. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania have seen massive increases in numbers. Again, don't concentrate on the numbers themselves. Multiply those by 15, but concentrate on the trending. It's been a huge mess up in the Northeast. There are at least 3 to 4 massive organized rings operating up there. They concentrate primarily on food and beverage, and they've been really tearing the supply chain apart up in that area. Recently, NYPD, in cooperation with the New Jersey State Police and the FBI, had a huge bust up there, and there was a little bit of a breath that everybody took, thinking, okay, this will slow things down up there, and within the following week, over a dozen cargo thefts were reported. It's almost as if they want to send you a message that, okay, you're not having the impact that you think you're having. Now, applause to the law enforcement units that did that. They did a fantastic job. They recovered, I think, close to $6 million in stolen cargo before it was moved out of the country, made several arrests. It's going to make an impact. But the other crews up there just filled the gap, unfortunately. When you look at just trailer burglary or pilferage, you can see that pilferage is a huge problem in the United States. I always say it's really the iceberg below the water. It's the most underreported method of cargo theft in the United States. Usually, they don't really know where it happened. If a trucker leaves California and is headed to Texas, and they get to Texas and they realize they're 2 or 3 pallets short, they don't know where it happened. There's nobody that they can report it to because they can't tell you definitively where it happened. Quite often it falls below their insurance deductible. It ends up going into OS&D, and usually it's not even reported at all. So when you see these numbers, these are really a very small portion of all the pilferages that take place. My home state is Arizona. Arizona recently entered the top 10 for cargo theft, and that's largely based on the fact that we have massive pilferage crews working the Arizona-California border. Because in California, I think Thorsten mentioned this when he was up here earlier, in California, gas is $7, but in Arizona, it's $3.75. So the truckers coming out of California don't stop in California to fuel. They make it to the Arizona border. They get just across the border. There you are, Thorsten, I was looking for you. They make it just across the border, and they fuel up there, and the pilferage crews are just waiting for them there in the truck stops, and they're just ruthlessly hitting them and pilfering 2, 3, 4 pallets into Sprinter vans or box trucks. When we look at the commodities, food and beverage has been number 1 since 2010. Cargo thieves are really good at pivoting. I always say they're really good at 2 things. One, knowing what to steal and when to steal it, and 2, return on investment. When we get to what to steal and when to steal it, food and beverage is number 1, but if you take the example of pivoting quickly, in 2020 when COVID hit, household goods became number 1 very quickly because everybody was home, we were all working from home, we were educating our students from home, we were doing everything from home, so they immediately pivoted to household goods. In 2021, we were told there was going to be a chip shortage. They quickly pivoted to electronics, and electronics took the number 1 spot. That was very brief, but they did that based on the rumors of the shortage, the fact that we were all working from home, and the kids were educating from home. And then when all things started to normalize again, they immediately went back to food and beverage. Within that category, non-alcoholic beverages, basically energy drinks, are your number 1 targeted commodity, followed recently by meat products, which have surged, and then alcoholic beverages, which really makes a good mix for a party or any kind of a gathering like this. Thorsten, are we having steak tonight? Maybe. So state-wise, California, Texas has been number 2 for the last 3 years. That could change at any moment. Florida was number 2 for the longest time. Illinois just took the number 3 spot. New Jersey is jumping up there. In the first quarter for 2026, New Jersey took the number 3 spot. So this will change and this will be volatile. Lastly, when we get into the details of those commodities, when you get down to just a single piece of cargo, a single type of cargo, vehicle and accessories has been number 1 for the last 2 years. That's really tires. That's really tires. And then alcoholic beverages, you see copper and metals have jumped into the number 2 spot for 2025. That continues into 2026. The metal industry is just absolutely getting hammered. When you look at the average value on electronics, it has jumped up massively. We were just talking about this. This is being spiked though. The real true average value of electronics load is going to be around that $400,000 mark. But you see this massive spike because over the last couple of years, we've had massive things targeted, massive servers valued at $30 million, $20 million, Bitcoin machines at $8 million, $2 million, things like that, which are spiking these numbers. I know I have to rush through these last parts. Some of the data that we can dial down to in the United States is your likelihood of a theft. In other words, if you're moving freight out of California, you have a 91% higher chance of being targeted for theft, 28% chance if you're moving it into California. So we can really dial down on our data through CargoNet, which has been good for our members. You see that most of our cargo theft in the United States is being conducted now. This is the massive change that we saw since 2020 from organized crews around the globe, India being the number 1 country, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, and then down the line. 17% of the attempts that we see involve fake IDs or changed driver's licenses. I could talk about this on the panel because I know I'm set for time, but this is a new method that we've seen in the United States. And then the last thing I'll talk about here is we're trying to figure out what are we going to see over the next few years. We have seen a slight increase in violence in the United States. Very little, less than 4% of all cargo theft in the United States involves violence. Usually when we see it, it's around last mile pharmaceutical couriers. But we have seen a couple of loads around Legos and electronics recently in Chicago and California. We think there's a specific crew doing that. We know that the crews are sharing intel. We see them sharing and selling intel on the dark web, on different websites. They're selling passwords. They're selling weaknesses on companies so that they can coordinate with each other. We're seeing new players enter all the time. They're spoofing most of the technology like trucker tools and macro points. They like to play the victim and pretend that they're part of the theft, meaning a victim of the theft, to try and delay reporting, things like that. So these are some of the things that we can talk about when we get into the panel.
Scott, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Scott and welcoming Tony to the stage.
I'm supposed to go sit over here, I think.
Scott, thank you very much for that. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Tony Lugg. I'm the chairman of TAPA Asia Pacific. I have Alvin in the audience with me. Today he'll be on a panel discussion. I'm going to give you an update on some of the developments that we've done within Asia Pacific. And everything that Scott's talked about our members in Asia Pacific, as you'll see from the stats, have these problems. Okay. Why do we have that problem? If you look at this slide alone, and you look at how much products are produced in Asia Pacific, there's something like, it's come up to about 9 trillion. And then when you look at some of the trade flows going across, you can see why we have some of the issues that we have, and why we need to do things differently. We have a lot of complexities, like Europe. We have multi-countries. Alvin may touch upon that in terms of the cultural issues. We have the geopolitical issues. We have a lot of issues around natural disasters. We have the annual half-year typhoons, about 20 typhoons coming in. We have earthquakes and all of those other complexities. All right, so why have we changed our outlook? So previously, we had the FSR and we had the TSR. Those are all well known. I'm not going to even talk about that. But some of the things that we found when we went out and did the audits was that we weren't as good as we thought we were. So if you remember the concept of when the FSR was originally brought in, the logistics service providers, the expectation was at this level. When we did the audits, the expectation fell well below that. And through that audit process, obviously, we then started getting the carriers to certify themselves and things of that nature. Now, why is an SSP any different to that? And they're not. So in some of the, and this has not just happened in recent years, this has been consistent, that you go to a manufacturing plant for an audit, and then suddenly the security service provider doesn't even understand the concept of TAPA and all of the rationale and reasoning behind it. So that's why we introduced the GSR. Cyber, you already know, so I'm not going to waste time talking about that because we're limited for time, obviously. When I look at some of the other standards, I'm just going to introduce the risk assessment standard first of all. 68% of the companies involved in the pandemic didn't have a business continuity plan. It's amazing, right? So why didn't it? When we did the research, we found out those companies hadn't even completed a risk assessment. And then in that risk assessment, what we found was that the scope within the FSR and the TSR was probably a little bit too narrow. So we put this team of experts together and we developed a standard. Now, why is it a standard and not a checklist? We know historically that checklists do not work. If you get people to do a tick box exercise, you'll end up with failure. And certainly, I know from my T&T days, that's what we had. When we did desktop exercises, we were all 100%. We put everybody onto a TAPA training course, and then suddenly the figure came up at 38%. So we know from evidence that tick boxes don't work, and that's why we made it a standard. So from that, then we produced the business continuity. Now, you think we would have learned the lessons from COVID. You think we would have learned the lessons from the recovery after COVID, especially with the rush. And obviously, Scott's covered some of the issues that we had during COVID and during that recovery. And if you look at some of the attacks on e-commerce, that changed a lot of the ways that we do things. We saw the attacks on the rails and things of that nature. But one thing we realized was that in terms of our planning, our preparation, we weren't as good as we thought we were. And hence, that's why it became a standard. In terms of pharmaceutical, the pharmaceutical industry came to us. More losses in the supply chain, more losses impacting integrity of the goods within the supply chain. We put a working group together and we produced that standard. All right, so now we have created an ecosystem of standards and tools for the members to use. Now, why is that important? Because if you look at us as being the manufacturing base of the world, it's like a computer. If you don't put the right information in, by the time it gets into the US or the time it gets into Europe, you're going to have a big problem. So the concept is that where we used to talk about resilience, we need to go past that. Remember, it's not just cargo theft at the end. If you look at some of the complexities that we have in Asia, some of the goods don't even get there. And when you start to look at delays and disruption and putting cargo at risk, that's where we decided we need to do something differently, and this is where we introduced the anti-fragile supply chain. Now, why did we introduce that? I know for myself, when I was working for Lear Corporation, I was asked to take on 2 divisions and bring those both together. And being in automotive, highly egotistic, everyone wants to do their own thing, and of course, you know, they had all of the complexities of the internal politics. But one thing I realized is that me flying around to manufacturing plants across the region wasn't going to solve the problem. So again, by looking at how could I digitize that, how can I use AI, back in 2015, already using AI, to actually predict failures across the supply chain. But how did I get there? I used TAPA Standards as a baseline. Because unless you have a baseline, unless you have a framework to work on, you won't succeed. But rather than going back to what we did, as you heard from Andreas this morning, you know, the bending of the bamboo cane, every time you go back to what you were always doing, you always got what you always, sorry, you always get what you always got. So what did it mean? It meant that every time we did something different, every time we fixed a problem, and don't forget, when you close down a manufacturing plant, the penalty is something like $600 a minute. Now that gets into the boardroom. So imagine you then develop a system where you introduce TAPA to all your LSPs and your facilities, even if you just start off at the baseline. And then from that, from every single crisis event, we use the same methodology in terms of risk assessment, in terms of looking at every single aspect that could occur. Even when Trump came in with tariffs, we were already ready for that. And why? Because we looked at the individual. Remember, when Trump was a Democrat, he was already talking about tariffs. So why are we even talking about that issue today? And that it really illustrates the lack of a risk assessment within your organization. So every time we came to a problem and we fixed that problem, that became our new baseline. We didn't go back to what we were doing. That was our new baseline. And how did we do that? So I'm not going to read out all of these slides. We haven't got time. This is normally a 45-minute presentation. But rather than, you know, this one here, where we talk about the technology, we talk about standards, collaboration. Collaboration is the most important thing. And go back to Lear Corporation. When I did that project, I did it with Panalpina. And DSV, any DSV in the audience, you have the benefit of all of the good work we did with Panalpina there in developing these anti-fragility models. So let me jump this slide here, right, because I think a lot of this has been covered. What I wanted to do was to, oh, it's not here, where is it gone? What I wanted to do is to walk you through, all right, let me go back to here, a couple of areas here. All right, so what is anti-fragility? So we spoke about why it matters, that I think it's clear you understand that. And in terms of building the anti-fragility supply chain, I think I've covered that and why TAPA standards actually give you that baseline across all of your facilities. But when we start to look at the core capabilities of your team and who can adapt into it, not everybody can adapt to an anti-fragility model because you do need entrepreneurs involved in it. You do need people with the visions to look into the future and see what the problem is. So go back to Trump. When I was in China, when Trump got elected and came in for the first term, the Chinese didn't have a problem with Trump coming in. They knew he was a business guy. Yet in the media, we had all of the noise. So in terms of the risk assessment process, had we done a risk assessment process properly, we would have already had people in the war room actually examining the problem and starting to look where we could source differently. Another example, when the first aircraft carrier went across to the Middle East, how many of you were already in the war room? When the second one went, how many were you in the war room thinking, right, what's the next thing we need to do? And then when when that happened, were you already examining all your supply chains? Had you already diverted? And that's what the anti-fragility teaches us to do. It teaches us to look at all of these issues and stop doing what we were doing before and stop waiting for the calamity to happen. Is to take the proactive action and do it fast. Now, go back to Lee Corporation. When I first joined as the head of logistics and purchasing, they told me to bring my fire suit, and you know what? They weren't wrong. 18 months of flying around, sticky plaster, patch up. But once we put all of these processes in place, once we put the AI in place, which is a tool to help us, we didn't close down one single manufacturing plant. And some of the lessons that I learned from TAPA were also the lessons that I learned from Intel. And good old Steve McHugh was actually one of those people I learned from it. So what am I saying here? What TAPA's realized in Asia Pacific is that we can't just have an FSR, we can't just have a TSR. It's not going to solve the problems that the members have. And we need to be talking the same language that the boardroom is talking, because if you're not, you're out of the game. You're not even a blip within the discussions of what's going on. So those are some of the things that we've adopted there. All right, so in terms of cargo risks, I'm not going to talk about cargo risks. You should already know this, okay? But in terms of education, some of the things that we're trying to say to our members is, learn from the mistakes that's happening in the US at the moment. Learn from some of the mistakes that are happening in Europe at the moment. Learn from these new trends, because ultimately it's the shippers in Asia Pacific, you know, you can see from the stats, it's the shippers originating in Asia Pacific that are having the problem overseas. And some of that is naivety. They're naive to the problems that you're having. They're naive to some of the new frauds, and of course, in terms of education, that's some of the things that we need to do. Okay, all right, so look, that's some of the issues, but one of the things that our members are saying to us is, look, you know, everything you're doing is great, but we want you to do more. And they call me up and they say, look, counterfeit goods, if you look at the model that you have within TAPA, you already have law enforcement contact, you already have a very structured audit program, globally recognized. Why can't we choke the counterfeit supply chain? The brand owners are saying, why can't the LSPs make a commitment not to carry counterfeit goods? Because if that happened, we could choke the counterfeit supply chain tomorrow. So those are one of the other things that we're looking at doing. Okay, in terms of cargo trends, we'll send these slides out afterwards. I'm not going to concentrate on them too much, but if you look at the types of crimes that we have in Asia, they're not the same as the US. They are not the same as TAPA EMEA. In EMEA and US, a lot of consumer purchases, etc. So you have a different type of crime to the crimes that we have. Hey, of course, we still have smuggling. Of course, we still have hijacks, but not on the scale that you guys have. Now, as disposable income does come up within Asia, we do anticipate that we're going to have the same problem as you, but at the moment, our problems are slightly different. And hence, that's why you'll see that some of the things that we do are different to you. Okay, so these are some of the nice, pretty pictures that we have. We were in Vietnam last week at a great launch of a cargo terminal, which is the future of the world. It's a port where you have rail, road, air, and ocean coming in. And look, we have our conference coming up in September. I've got 39 seconds left, so I will want you to scan this, and I want to see you in Singapore in September, and I want you to be there telling our members about some of the experiences that you're having across the region and why they need to do something different. Thank you very much.
Tony, thank you. Let me invite everybody else up now for the panel. From TAPA EMEA, President and CEO Thorsten Neumann, Chair Marcel Saarloos, and Vice Chair Antonio Knezevic, and Vice Chair of TAPA Americas, Jennifer Bennett, and please do take a seat, Executive Director of TAPA APAC, Alvin Lau. Thank you all so much for being here. Thorsten, We've had a lot of new members since this time last year. Maybe you could explain to anyone that isn't aware why you are standing at a bar and not here on the panel.
1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, very easy. So over the couple of years, it's always difficult to get questions from the audience. At the second you leave the conference and you're staying in the bar, you will be bombarded with questions. So that's the reason why we thought, let's bring the bar to the stage. So now it's your time to raise questions in confidence to me via the app. Okay, like that we are in the bar. You can join me for a beer, for a gin, whatever you want. You know, and then I raise the questions. Okay, so that's the reason why we're doing it.
So, Thorsten, I'm going to come to you in a minute. Just let me quickly ask Tony, because I think we've got quite a few questions coming through, have we? You're going to field those for us. Tony, very quickly. Scott, sorry, let me start with you. Sorry. Is there any pending legislation in the US that would help address cargo theft?
There's several. There's really three main bills that are on the floor. The Corca bill is the one that I'll really speak to today, and that's the one that TAPA's been heavily involved in. I've traveled to DC on this several times, actually helped write the cargo theft language for it. It started off as an organized retail bill, and then Homeland Security kind of pointed out to us that, hey, this could easily be adapted to cargo theft as well. So we added the cargo theft language in. It's unanimously passed through the floor. It's in the Senate now. We're hoping that it seems to be very bipartisan, so we're hoping that it makes it through the Senate. If that happens, what it would mandate is the United States would have to start tracking cargo theft, which would be great for the industry. It would stand up a federal task force led by Homeland Security and then co-led by the FBI, the ATF, DOT, and a couple of other agencies. And it would designate 3 federal prosecutors that would just solely concentrate on prosecuting cargo theft across the United States. If that can, if that can make it through the Senate, that would be great for everything that we're trying to deal with in the U.S. Right now it looks good. We'll see. You never know. It's hard to predict.
The next question I can see online is really linked to the tomorrow session on TIS. Yeah, there's another one. It's, is TAPA Americas using TIS in the future as well? And it's not coming from me, by the way. I do not type this question.
We're not currently using them, no. We usually, right now, as I mentioned during the presentation, we get our cargo theft statistics from CargoNet, which produces the best numbers for US-based cargo theft. And then we use Overhaul for Mexico and South America. They do a really good job at pulling that data for us down there.
Okay, and Scott, let me just finish with you, and then we'll move on to APAC. Are there any dedicated law enforcement resources in the US focused on investigating and preventing cargo theft?
Several, yeah. So California, again, I mentioned, is the #1 state in the nation. Ironically, they have the most dedicated law enforcement to cargo theft. Cargo theft dedicated units have severely shrunk since 2020. Really impacted law enforcement budgets and staffing. So prior to 2020, we probably had about 145 officers completely dedicated to cargo theft across the United States. Now I would say it's down closer to probably about 75. 4 task forces in California, 2 task forces in Florida. The Georgia one was disbanded in 2020. Small task force or unit in New Jersey. Memphis still has, I think, 1 person. Kentucky's largely gone now. Where am I missing? There's no dedicated law enforcement in Texas.
We do have to whiz through because we have so many of you and so much to ask. Let me just come and cover APAC a little bit. And Alvin, I'll start with you. As global organizations expand deeper into Asia-Pacific operations, how important is it to establish common security standards and consistent enforcement across facilities, transport networks, and partners? And what risks do companies face when this isn't being prioritized?
I think having a common language is important in that sense, and I think TAPA actually exactly serves that in a global level. But I think one of the mistakes that a lot of companies make when they come into Asia Pacific is that they do not understand how diverse culturally it is across several hundred kilometers. It's really a huge challenge. And a lot of times we want to try to look at it in a local perspective, and we try to localize and do single location risk assessments, and stuff like that. But in actual fact, if it works better as a program, as a regional program, it will be much better. Or even as a global program, we have seen members done that successfully over the last few years. We have some prominent members that has actually approached us, and we actually developed some programs and actually helped them in a global level. So that's something that I thought it was pretty successful in implementing, especially coming from Asia Pacific, right? So that's some parts of it.
Thorsten, maybe I can pick up on that point with you as companies are expanding deeper into APAC. What are EMEA members concerned about, and what's TAPA EMEA doing to support TAPA EMEA members?
Yeah, I think the biggest point is now really connecting the dots. So when we've been approached in EMEA, we always guide them towards the experts in APAC. So we always say, hey guys, please contact TAPA APAC. Whilst we do the same in TAPA Americas, and TAPA Americas and APAC are doing exactly the same. So that's really for me already where we join forces and say, guys, go to the regions. That's really quite important, and we are working perfectly together on this side.
And Tony, on that note, if you could give one message to companies that are headquartered in EMEA or in the Americas who are growing that footprint across Asia Pacific, what should they prioritize today to build more secure, resilient, trusted supply chains in the region?
I think the due diligence is highly important. I don't think there's enough of that going on. And sometimes, the localisms are not aware of the localisms, as Alvin mentioned, in terms of culture. And of course, I go back to risk assessment. I'm probably one of the biggest advocates of risk assessments, because if you do that properly, if you walk that through correctly, you will identify every single risk, and then you'll be able to address it appropriately.
Thorsten, have we got anything coming through more on the app that you want to?
Yeah, we have tons of questions. Some of them are not really linked to this session, I must say, but I will answer them in other sessions. I think the big question is really again on technology. Which emerging technologies do you believe will have the greatest impact on cargo security over the next decade?
Okay, well, let me choose one person from each region for that. Antonio or Marcel. Marcel.
Yeah, so, and I think I mentioned it in the podcast as well, it's that we tend, or the shippers tend to, I should say that the transporters tend to bend the rules because of the pressure of the shippers. So that is already a risk, especially now, and Scott mentioned it already, the shortage on CPUs and those kind of products that has massive demand. And I already seen it in some companies where security was not even involved, it was just shipped. And that is a risk, so not including security. From a technology point of view, and a few years ago, I was a keynote speaker at the Amsterdam Security Conference, and that was all about cyber. And I know cyber is a buzzword, like resilience is, like AI, etc. But what I said there still goes. I said, the technology, the development of technologies is going by light speed. And the criminals tend to embrace that. We don't, because we need to know what is the cost, how many departments does it need to go through, et cetera, et cetera. So, mentioned by Thorsten already is that they're always a step ahead. And that's what we need to realize, that especially with combinations of new technology, and I'm just calling out the autonomous driving, the driverless trucks, combined with AI, I'm so happy that I retire in 3 years.
Who would like to, Alvin, would you like to pick that up from APAC?
So I actually got invited to attend a robotics or humanoid event, and I got the honor to speak there. And I think the emerging risks in Asia Pacific in terms of technology, besides cyber, is also the robotics and some of the humanoid technology that we are moving towards, especially within the supply chain itself. Like Marcel mentioned, autonomous driving. You have your warehousing technologies. You have all these, but it boils down to the cyber part of it, which is the first layer. And I can't emphasize emphasize more that CSS is something that is serious. I think it's really something that you want to take into consideration to bundle it together with your FSR, make sure that it's all in place, and that forms that first layer. And then we move on to autonomous driving, we move on to robotics, we move on to humanoid. That's something that to think about.
Are there any emerging technologies other than the ones we've heard about that the Americas are concerned about?
I think the first thing I always say is if you jump to technology first, you're always going to lose. It will always fail you. So we always stress using the standards as a basis for good process and procedures. It's always, first of all, good process and procedures have the lowest cost, usually, right? Then you stack technology on top of that. I think it's twofold. When you look at straight theft, I think continued advancements in tracking. We just had a large recovery a week ago. If we didn't have redundant, Jennifer mentioned redundancy in tracking. We had really good tracking in that load a couple of weeks ago, and that enabled us to go and find that load and recover it, which was a major recovery. But then the other type of technology that's really proving to be vital to the industry is the carrier vetting part of it. When we've seen the massive increases in strategic theft, and to Jennifer's point, knowing exactly who you're doing business with, that technology that we're seeing really come to the forefront in the United States to make sure that you know exactly who it is that you're doing business with.
Just quickly from you, Alvin, before I move on to EMEA to wrap up. Asia Pacific continues to attract significant manufacturing, sourcing, and logistics investments from global organizations. So from your perspective, what makes APAC uniquely challenging from a supply chain security standpoint? And why should companies from the EMEA Americas rethink how they secure their regional operations? Very briefly, if you can.
This is a good question. I think APAC has always been the manufacturing hub of the world, right? And I think there are a lot of contract manufacturers, and then they're moving across the different countries in Asia. One of the key challenges, I would think, again, the complexity of the different cultures, the productivity issues, the geopolitical tensions, no matter how small Asia is. In that sense, there are, within Southeast Asia itself, or even ASEAN itself, there are geopolitical tensions. These are stuff to navigate, and I think Tony mentioned about risk assessment. I can't emphasize that risk assessment is something basic. It is the fundamental before coming to Asia, I would say. And besides that, I think the natural calamities within Asia itself is something to look forward to, and that's where the BCP comes in plan. And all these are intended. All these are something that members express interest and of importance, and that's why in Asia we really hear out, listen to the members, give what the members want, and we try to develop an ecosystem within the supply chain resilience itself.
Just move on quickly to EMEA before we wrap up. And Antonio, I really wanted to bring you in. I know you've been listening to everything that's been said. If you could reflect on the points that have been raised, where do you see similarities and differences in the challenges and maybe the approaches with EMEA and...
I think actually, yeah, we clearly hearing and seeing that the risk and the threat, it's on the highest level in all the regions. At the same time, I also think, well, we have a very good standard, right, across all the regions, so a unified and harmonized approach. And I also see, yeah, where potentially we need to strengthen, it's our footprint, right, generally speaking, right, that we support each other, support the members, and vice versa, and then we can really tackle all those emerging threats, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. Marcel, maybe we just talk quickly about the three associations. When do they come together and collaborate?
So there is a program where we what we call program. It's a worldwide council, and that's once a month that we representatives of the board join in a call, where basically twofold. So on one hand, it's the updates from the regions, and on the other side, it's if there's collaboration like on the worldwide change control board for the standards, that's what updates are shared with as well, and where the board needs to intervene if necessary or needs to support if necessary. So that is a common thing, and on let's say bilateral, we have also individual contacts. I know APAC is talking to the Americas and to us, and we do the same thing. So as soon as we have something that we think, oh wow, maybe the knowledge is there, then we will contact each other and share that, because like everything in TAPA, we need to do it together, otherwise we won't make it. So.
And we're actually meeting this week after the conference.
Exactly.
Where we can collaborate more. So.
We were all asked to stay another day for a worldwide council meeting. The first one since many years to face. So.
Yep.
So maybe, as Thorsten says, more to come. Thorsten, over to you, because I want to finish with you. How is the setup of EMEA different from TAPA EMEA, different from APAC and Americas? And we'll finish on that note.
Yeah, I think the main difference is really that our constitution and bylaws are going more and more into a kind of an advisory board level. We have an executive team who is taking care of all the daily business, and the executive team is also part of the board. You know, and I think that's really the biggest difference. Other than that, I only would like to say we have a lot of questions. A lot of these questions will be answered over the next 1.5 days. Okay, so don't get me wrong. But a lot of them I can read right now will be answered over the next 1.5 days. And I'm looking forward also to today, tomorrow, and the Worldwide Council.
Fantastic. Well, I think we could be chatting all afternoon, but we have some other sessions. So please join us in thanking all of our panelists for their fantastic contributions and presentations.
Oh, thank you.